Hello everyone, we are so delighted to be joined today by our Human Impact Wildlife Artists of the Year 2020 judges, Stephen, Amanda, Martin and Emily. Wildlife Artist of the Year this year was a fantastic success, and we've been so overwhelmed by over 1,200 entries from 53 different countries, and Human Impact is one of our newest categories, which was actually the brainchild of Martin a few years ago. So I'm going to jump straight to Martin to just talk a little bit about why Human Impact is such an important category for us as a wildlife and conservation and environmental organisation, and in relation to wildlife art.
Yes, thanks. Well, I'm very flattered that you've given me credit for this category, because I'm not sure I actually came up with the idea, but it's certainly been a conversation that we've been having over a few years. And we've talked a lot about how we really can't ignore our impact on the environment, the planet. So I commend you guys hugely for setting up this new category. I think it's really brilliant and really important. And I think of it in relation to the wildlife filmmaking industry. And I use an example, Blue Planet, when that first came out, because it was amazing, but it didn't have any conservation message, or at least really not much at all to it. And it got a bit of criticism within the industry for not doing that. Then you jump forward, I think it was about 16 years between Blue Planet 1 and Blue Planet 2, and it totally changed. And obviously Blue Planet 2 really focused on our human impact on the world, and basically kick-started this war on plastic. Every industry really needs to be considering that. And wildlife art in particular should be talking about the impact on the planet.
Amanda, you're a lecturer in fine art. So what's your perspective on this? Because it's a slightly different one to necessarily coming from a purely creative. And I'd love to get your feedback as to the importance of human impact and using art to tell that story.
My work and my approach to my own kind of practice is about our kind of interrelationship with the natural world, and actually thinking about this breaking down of the hierarchies between the human and what we consider is nature, as something that's out there, that we are of nature. So I'm very interested in kind of quite a lot of the kind of theory that's around thinking about rethinking our relationship and our interconnectivity with the world, and kind of thinking about nature cultures, which is a kind of a term by Donna Haraway and Bruno Latour. So yeah, those kind of ideas are kind of something that I'm kind of interested in, and come out in, I guess, in my teaching.
And obviously I need to mention that Scarlett Henderson was the winning artist for this category with There's No Smoke Without Fire. And Stephen, I know you were particularly drawn, as we all were, to this particular piece. So do you have any comments as to why this one really spoke to the judging panel this year?
Yeah, absolutely. I really loved the composition, especially for this piece. Just the way that she'd sort of offset the birds to one side, with the smoke coming up the middle. That was almost sort of a perfect symbol of kind of man's oppression of nature, really sort of driving it off to the side of the page. That spoke to me. And then as soon as I was engaged with that, I then looked further into the detail of the piece. And as you know, me and Martin are always sort of looking at sort of the way that things have been executed. And I thought it was superb. It was absolutely beautiful, the pointillism, the way that she had built up tones through the clouds. Yeah, definitely a winning piece.
Yeah, I think we all had that in our top 5 when it came to deciding on the winner, didn't we? And there were some fantastic pieces that came. And there's one I particularly like, which is Killer Fashion. What Stephen just talked about, the execution. Firstly, I'm always impressed by anything that's done in pen and ink, because there's such small margin for error with that medium. And this one was just executed so well. And I think like the winner we chose last year, something I really liked about this piece was that juxtaposition of the natural and unnatural shapes all in one. And compositionally, it's bang on. It really screams horror, but also it's beautiful in a strange way. And I think that really, for me, is human impact down to a T. Love that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emily, can you just touch on, you obviously, a lot of your artwork specifically is around this exact concept of using wildlife art or art to tell the story, and especially in terms of human impact and the exploitation of natural resources. So can you just expand a little bit on why the category as an overall category is such an important inclusion into Wildlife Artist of the Year?
Well, listening to Amanda then, there's a lot that I can empathise with and hear where she's coming from. And I think we're in a really exciting space where we're all starting to see things differently. And I think I say we, but young people now, and I put myself way out of that equation now, but like kind of late teens and early 20s, they are seeing things, breaking things down in such a way where actually there literally has to be a space that facilitates this kind of discussion. And I think what we saw this year was breaking again the molds of what art needs to be under a traditional construct. I think people are showing their personalities and their responses this way, and to facilitate this in the way that we do, I think we just need to invite people to be really, really brave, and actually have no rules applied. I love the way Amanda's artistic reach is to, you know, things like, I just from what you said, Amanda, when we were last together, you know, there's theatre in there, there's music, there's dance, there's everything that is expression. You know, some people do want to just go to their quiet space and paint a picture of something that means a lot to them, whereas others want to just feel this burn of expression with other people, and that is dance, and that's other things. So I think we need to, as an organisation and as a platform, just facilitate that very open space where we are brave enough to embrace what people have to say about this. I think my own personal journey is that, the paintings are evolving, and I'm watching that through other people's, and especially young people. Yeah. We're seeing artwork that just is, you're going, wow, like, where did they come up with that? Oh, it's because it's a direct reference from this, and they've taken it, channeled it through themselves with the discussion of their young friends and that are interested in something completely different. And we've got all of these commodities that we're challenged with and need to address, and actually there are no rules, there are no obvious strategies forward, and art literally is the tools to have that discussion board in visual manner.
We have to do something about this. It's kind of, I think it's got to be, not even, there's no discussion as to whether it should be on the table. Like, people can't help but it kind of, we've got to rethink every aspect of our lives, our life, in order to kind of think about how we are going to change our relationship with the natural world, and with all the kind of processes that we have on the planet. And obviously, therefore, art, because that's one of our kind of ways of being in the world, is kind of going to be really key to kind of, like you were saying, telling stories, and that's a way to kind of help people to kind of rethink how they might be different or act differently in the world.
And even this current situation now with COVID, with everybody sort of being locked down and actually having a chance to sit quietly and immerse themselves in nature, and just evaluate their position. Everything from the cars quietening down and the roads being silent, enabling you to listen to the bird song, makes you realise that actually we're surrounded by nature, and we need to take care of it because we're drowning it out. And it's been really interesting to see sort of people tone things down, and also turn back to creative works, mainly to fill their time, but sort of it's re-engaged and sort of brought us back into that part of our lives, which is, I think, beautiful to see. So I'm kind of hoping that everybody continues this after.
And I think this year, last year the winning piece was of shark fin, which is obviously a huge, big international issue in the conservation landscape. But it's lovely to see this year there were a lot more pieces which were almost just our impact on everyday life. It didn't have to be these huge overarching discussions, which, are seen on the BBC documentaries, for example. Everyone is affected, and our human impact at whatever level has an impact on the environment and on nature and the natural world. So I think this year was really interesting to see that there were many more pieces, and especially the winning piece, where it was far more relatable in terms of our access points to addressing and assessing our impact on the environment, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a broad category, obviously, human impact. I mean, we have an impact everywhere, like you just said. But it was interesting to see the pieces that came in this year covered like a really broad spectrum. We had for fashion industry, animal testing, oceans. I'm just scrolling through the ones we put through, but also COVID. There's that wonderful piece, Breathe. I mean, I think it was painted in February, so that artist obviously instantly reacting to what's happening now.
You know that artist who created something in February, which is a direct response from things we're seeing, that artist, when they are celebrated and people are listening to them, they are spreading that immense passion that has drawn them to do that piece through the ripples of their family and friends. And And that's why I believe celebrating artists who are doing this work that's responding is so important, because they're real passion houses that can, behind the scenes, create a lot of change and be brave enough to speak about things.
The other thing we're talking, I think, is your man talking about the urgency. Urgency is such an important word, because urgency in so many ways, but also in the way we're viewing things now. The world is largely moving online, almost exclusively in the past few weeks. And you have to be quicker, and you have to grab attention effectively when you're working online, because people just, I mean, it's not like being in a gallery where you've got time to go around and really take in every piece. On Instagram, you've got like less than a second to really try and grab someone's attention. So works like this that look horrific, they're so important, because they might just grab someone's attention, someone that's not invested or is maybe not educated, enough to get them to click on and educate themselves. So that's again why I think this category is so important in this time that we're living in.
I think you're right about Instagram as well, that what I thought was the No Smoke Without Fire, and also the other works that, you know, because they're dealing with representation, and often the works, if you're not able to see them in the flesh, you aren't instantly able to necessarily know what the material is or what the media is. And so often things that have a photographic quality on Instagram could just be glanced over as a photograph. So for example, we started talking about There's No Smoke Without Fire by Scarlett Henderson. What I really loved about the piece is that, you know, it isn't photographic, and there is an obvious kind of connection to this fact of it being drawn, but it's not the drawn line, it's this dot, and this dot that connects the media of this every kind of pointillistic dot of that pen to the particle of smoke, or the particles that make up smoke. So for me, where the work, and I think this was also the case maybe with one of the pieces last year, and I can't remember which, was where the material or the media kind of connected really well with that message. If this was a drawn mark with line and shading, it wouldn't be so strong, but the fact that it's this dot, it marries that idea of smoke being made from the kind of dot particle of dust.
There's another thing to consider as well with these kind of works, which is they're not very sellable.
I don't actually agree on that, Martin.
Sorry. No, I mean, I said they're not all sellable. Like, so I would not all. Own a lot of these, but what I'm saying is generally, like, the general public wouldn't be rushing to buy.
Because you're tackling difficult subjects.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which are uncomfortable, usually, in general.
That's right.
And that's where the power of art can come in, because, for example, it's very rare nowadays, like we were talking about with that Instagram culture, that people will sit and read an entire article around one of these issues that they're trying to tackle, but actually a very quick visual, which is something that is a bit more uncomfortable and you wouldn't necessarily have on your wall. By us embedding it in a more mainstream competition, it is hopefully at least giving a little bit more of a voice to some of these issues that we all need to be aware of and not turn away from.
But in a positive way, if you do end up purchasing one of those pieces, if you've got that on your wall and you have friends coming round, there's a story to it, and there's something to actually get into and talk about, which just adds more and more interest to the piece.
I don't think that people only want to buy work that's visually, aesthetically like relaxing or beautiful in a sense. I think people do want, like Stephen was saying, works that are talking points, that are points for challenge and for discussion. They might not be, I can't imagine necessarily having the piece Surgical Murder in my living room, but I might have it in a more private place, which I could take people to and have a conversation with. So I think, maybe people don't want it sort of in the living room, possibly where they're going to be relaxing, but they might want it in a place where they want to contemplate things and where they can then start a conversation with people when we are all allowed to have people round in our homes again. I'm always interested in having the more difficult works around. I just have to argue about where they go.
Martin, I'd love to kind of just pick up a little bit on what you've just said, Amanda, in terms of, because a lot of your art, Martin, you always try and make a really, a clear message as to whether it's an environmental issue or this role that we play in terms of, destroying nature. And when you create those pieces, because obviously the category of human impact, it's 16 to 22, so it's a younger artist group who are creating, which sometimes it can be quite a brave decision to say, I'm going to start a piece of artwork not because of its saleability or because I want it to hang on someone's wall, but actually it's quite a brave decision to say, this is a piece of artwork that I'm creating from an entirely different standpoint. And that's what you do a lot with some of your pieces as well. And is it a very conscious decision from your process when you start a piece that this is going to be much more about the message and raising awareness than it is for, you know, necessarily being a beautiful piece of artwork, for example?
I've been entering human impact for 5 years before it even was a category, I guess. But it is a balance, and I obviously can't spend all my time working on these pieces because otherwise I'll never make a living. So it's trying to balance out the two. I am very aware that I'm very unlikely to sell that piece, but I feel I have to do it. If I think it's a good idea, I need to put it across. And the hope is that it just engages people and educates people. It's a balance. But like you said, Amanda, I really hope that these kind of works do become collectible as time goes on. And perhaps, you know, art does evolve, doesn't it? And perhaps these are the kind of works that this younger generation, as they grow up, will be having on their walls and talking about.
While we are talking about that, I just want to say that I admire your dedication to producing these works, which you know, or predict probably won't sell, and yet you put so many hours into them, so much time and effort, just purely for the message. So while we're talking, well done, mate. Thank you.
And Emily, I'd love to chat more around art in terms of as a tool of engaging younger people around a lot of the issues who, to be honest, are far more clued up as to what's going on in our environmental impact than a lot of older generations. But what do you feel is one of the most important things that art can do from that early age, as a, you know, from a creative point of view, in terms of connecting people back to nature and the reality of our impact?
So I can think of a few that I'm speaking to at the moment. 21-year-old who started his own conservation campaign, and he is so smart, so clued up, and these guys just, like, they know everything. And I'm learning from them. And I think, I mean, to be bold, I would love to see a category come in where it was bold enough to say works not necessarily for sale or not for sale, discussion standpoints. I mean, I personally can relate many times to producing a piece of artwork, and you've got that little shadow in the back of your mind going, but this needs to sell. And it's like, but I want to say this. Today, with this thing of urgency, it's like it's almost like a topic we need to address, when actually it is the topic. It's the only topic that we have to address. And when people are kind of handicapped with that need to sell, or just having a whole competition that is for sale, if there could be something somewhere that just goes, hey, talk about it really loudly. I think that's where young people can just do things we can't even imagine. And I would love to see that space facilitated.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the David Shabrada Foundation have an annual children's art competition, which is for, you know, much younger children, called Global Canvas. And the creativity, and obviously none of those pieces are for sale, but the creativity, and they always have to try and use sustainable or materials that they found around the house, is, I mean, it's far greater than once we've almost got into our boxes as to, like you said, that commerciality, that angle of it. And the lino cuts, the gentle giant piece, and another one. Does anyone want to just kind of explain why those ones ended up in the final? I mean, for me personally, just aesthetically, I think they're beautiful, and they tell a really important story around, you know, that's a very obvious human impact in terms of the visual nature between humans and sea versus the impact on species. But those for me were two pieces that will really stand out as well.
The artist knew exactly what they were discussing. You can tell that they thought about it. And the pieces are different. They thought about it. They saw the components, and there's many moving parts to those issues, and they managed to, which I think is genius, to put that into a small space through line work and careful consideration and placement. And that's brilliant, because you look into that and you start to see what is being talked about, and oh, I can relate to that, oh, I can relate to that, and it's all together. That's a bit confusing. Okay, let's talk about that. And it really does. I think it was really clever.
I think you're right, Emily. It's that sense of claustrophobia in what should be like a really vast environment, the oceans. But yeah, with the ship over the whale, it's got no space. Obviously, it's a mammal, needs to come up to get air. Yeah, a hugely impacting piece, that one.
I mean, it's really similar in terms of the no smoke without fire. Just with the birds being pushed off to one side, and that sort of the weight of that ship above it, sort of almost pushing down. I thought they were gorgeous pieces. And as somebody that sort of studied illustration, the technique and the way that they were presented and the finish was superb. And it's quite nice to see things like lino cuts and different techniques and mediums being used and competing against your sort of more known paintings and sculpture.
The Gentle Giant has sold, which kind of proves me wrong. So that's
brilliant. Well put, Mark.
Yeah.
Before we end, I would love to just get a little bit of a thought from each of you, having judged for 2 years in a row now, and also what you'd like to see next year in terms of any kind of growth or entries from this competition. Maybe Stephen, we can start with you and we'll just go through.
Emily was talking about having sort of something of real impact, sort of not necessarily for sale, and actually that made me think of Martin's piece of the koala burnt down into ash, and I thought it was absolutely perfect to have something which was almost purely concept. And it reminds us to stay in touch with that side of art as well as the things that are just purely beautiful. If we can sort of encourage perhaps one of these youngsters to really push the boundaries and just go with something edgy, and not sort of feel that they're going to be judged for doing so or have less of a chance of getting through, I want to see how far they can push it. Just go for it. I'd love to see more of that kind of conceptual pieces and pushing the artistic boundaries as well.
I've really enjoyed judging both years, how we have grappled with the different ways that we approach things, but also weirdly, one of us will love and someone can also hate a piece of work, and yet we also find this kind of place where we come together, where we all seem to agree on some works where they've got this power and this way that the material, the medium and the idea and the composition kind of come about to kind of work with something. But I think I also want to second Stephen's kind of thinking about concept. The course that I teach on, we're never pushing students to think about creating commercial kind of works, because that does kind of limit you if you're thinking about who might want to buy this or where it might sit. We're always wanting to get students to think about audience, but it's more about the dialogue that you want to have with an audience and what kind of ideas that you might want to be kind of talking about. I suppose I would suggest with younger people that often the titles of the work sometimes are a bit cheesy. So maybe it's kind of trying to be less maybe obvious with a title, but to think about kind of ideas and about process. I mean, I'm very kind of interested in process.
I would just really love to see this category get much stronger. When I say that, I just feel like we as judges and the organisation need to just facilitate that, because it's not like the subject needs to get stronger. It's already it's so thick, it's already there. We just need to be able to welcome the ideas to come forward. And I do think sometimes to take that commercial hat off and to say, guys, you're talking about some really cool things, and if you've got the art, show us and we can talk about it, and maybe we need to be creative in how we can show that separately somehow, or because these issues aren't something outside and what an artist can do for fun. The reason artists are doing these things is because the world is changing around us, and it's life or death. And these are serious things. Artists have always responded in times of war, in times of famine, in times of all these different things. And I think now is no different. Environmental issues are the forefront of anything, and we need to be facilitating their energy.
You said it there, it's right. It literally affects everyone and everything. I think I'll just say that we can be really excited about the standard and quality of artists just going on these last 2 years alone. It can give us real hope. And you were talking about it, Emily, about how engaged young people are and how knowledgeable they are. And we've got some great people coming up beneath us to really take it on and take it forward. And yeah, through art as well, telling stories. This category is such a great opportunity to be creative and tell those stories. So if you are of age and you have an idea, please just do it and enter. It's worth it. Because for one thing, by entering, you're supporting conservation anyway. So it's worth doing it for that alone. But you know, you might just get through, and art is very subjective. Judging is not easy. We all have different favorites. So you know, it's worth a shot, and I'd really encourage you to go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, a lot of what you guys have said, you know, we recognize, you know, we're a conservation organisation primarily, which is the point of the exhibition, but it's so great to be able to, us in our small way, to be able to push these environmental messages, which we hope other institutions and other organisations will start to promote as well. And I think it's also important, obviously, whilst human impact is only for 16 to 22-year-olds, all the other categories, whether it's urban wildlife facing extinction, we are definitely seeing more art from those categories from well-established artists already, who are definitely starting to just slightly more subtly, because they're obviously, you know, for us it is about raising vital funds to save wildlife across Africa and Asia, but there is definitely much more of a message creeping in there. And you know, Martin, you've been a real pioneer in that, and I think it is important that human impact is relevant in all of those other categories as well. It's not just primarily for this one category, but it's really exciting. And you know, every year we are seeing an increase in the number of entrants, and you know, we'd love to see more. And I think, as you guys have all said, it's wonderful to see that bravery of people telling messages that need to be told now and the urgency behind it. So just a huge thank you to all of the judges, and we look forward to coming back next year to judge again. Thank you very much, everyone.
Pleasure.
Thanks all.
See you all.
Bye.